The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Silverton as the stagecoach rolled to a stop in front of the general store. Passengers emerged, stretching their legs and brushing trail dust from their clothes. But it was the last figure to step down that made every conversation on the street die to a whisper. She was perhaps 16, with the distinctive features of the Apache high cheekbones, dark copper skin, and hair as black as a moonless night. But it was her eyes that caught attention, most not the expected defiance of a captive, but a hollow emptiness that spoke of losses too great for her young soul to bear. "Lord have mercy," whispered Mrs. Patterson, the preacher's wife, clutching her shawl tighter. "They brought one of them here?" The girl stood perfectly still beside the coach, her few possessions bundled in a worn blanket. She wore a simple brown dress that had seen better days, her feet bare despite the rough ground. Around her neck hung a small silver cross, the only sign of the missionary's influence during her 3 years of captivity. Sheriff Tom Bradley approached cautiously, his hand resting on his gun belt more from habit than necessity. The girl posed no physical threat, but her very presence seemed to unsettle the entire town. "You're Aiyana?" he asked, consulting a piece of paper. "The Apache girl from the mission?" She nodded once, her gaze fixed on the ground. The missionaries had called her Aiyana, Eternal Blossom, though she had long forgotten her birth name. 3 years ago, soldiers had found her near death beside the bodies of her family after a raid gone wrong. The mission had taken her in, fed her, clothed her, and tried to save her soul. But some wounds ran too deep for prayer alone. "Says here you're to be placed with a family," Sheriff Bradley continued, his voice not unkind but businesslike. "Someone willing to take you in, give you honest work." The gathered crowd stirred uneasily. The idea of harboring an Apache, even a seemingly broken one, sat poorly with most of the townsfolk. Too many of them had lost friends or family to Apache raids over the years. "She's cursed," muttered old Pete from his spot outside the saloon. "My brother died fighting her people. Nothing good will come of this." "Hush, Pete," said Martha Chun, the Chinese woman who ran the laundry. She had faced her own share of prejudice in Silverton. "She's just a child," but Pete's sentiment was shared by many. The Apache girl represented everything they feared about. The territory, the violence, the uncertainty, the constant threat of raids. Even transformed by missionary care, she remained a symbol of their darkest memories. From the edge of the crowd, a tall figure watched the proceedings with growing concern. Daniel McAllister had ridden into town for supplies, but the commotion had caught his attention. The rancher was a solitary man, his weathered face bearing the marks of 15 years on the frontier. He had built his spread 20 miles south of Silverton through hard work and determination, asking nothing from the town except to be left alone. But something about the girl's stillness, her resigned acceptance of the hostility surrounding her, stirred something in his chest. Daniel had known his share of loss. His wife Sarah had died of fever their first winter in the territory, leaving him alone with nothing but memories and an empty house. "Nobody's volunteering," Sheriff Bradley said after several minutes of uncomfortable silence. "Reverend Morrison, surely the church." "I'm sorry." "Sheriff," the Reverend interrupted, his face flushed with embarrassment. "The congregation, they're not ready for this. Perhaps if we had more time to prepare them." Daniel stepped forward before he could talk himself out of it. "I'll take her." The crowd turned to stare at him in shock. Daniel McAllister was known as a fair man, but he kept to himself. No one had expected him to volunteer for such a responsibility. "Daniel," Sheriff Bradley said carefully, "you sure about this? It's a big responsibility, and she's Apache." "I can see that," Daniel replied evenly. "She's also a child who needs a home." He approached the girl slowly, as he might approach a skittish horse. When he was close enough, he crouched down so they were at eye level. "My name is Daniel McAllister," he said quietly. "I have a ranch south of here. It's not much, but it's peaceful." You'd have your own room, regular meals, and honest work if you want it. No one will hurt you there." Aiyana looked up at him for the first time, searching his face for deception or cruelty. What she saw instead was something she had almost forgotten existed: genuine kindness. Not the missionary's righteous compassion or the soldier's grudging duty, but simple human decency. "Why?" she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Because everyone deserves a chance to heal. And because my ranch has been too quiet for too long." The girl studied him for another long moment, then nodded slightly. It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was acceptance. "This is madness, McAllister," called out Ben Foster, the town's banker. "You don't know what you're doing. Apache can't be trusted. It's in their blood." Daniel stood slowly, his jaw tightening. "Ben, you've never spent a day outside this town. Don't lecture me about Apache or anyone else." "She'll murder you in your sleep," Pete insisted. "Mark my words. Enough." Daniel's voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "I've made my decision. Sheriff, what papers need signing?" As the legal arrangements were completed, Daniel noticed the girl, Aiyana, watching everything with those hollow eyes. She reminded him of a wild creature that had been caged too long, spirit broken, but not entirely extinguished. "You got a horse?" he asked her as they prepared to leave. She shook her head. "Well, you can ride with me for now. We'll see about getting you your own mount once we get to the ranch." As they rode out of Silverton, Daniel could feel the weight of the town stares on their backs. He had just made himself an outcast, taking in an Apache girl when tensions were still high. But something about her reminded him of a wounded bird he had once found, fragile, frightened, but still clinging to life. "You know how to ride?" he asked as they settled into the rhythm of the journey. "Some," she replied, her voice barely audible. "We'll work on that. A person needs to know how to handle a horse out here." The ranch appeared before them as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. It was a modest spread, a sturdy log house, a barn, corrals, and pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. But to Aiyana, who had known only the cramped quarters of the mission dormitory, it looked like a different world. "This is home," Daniel said simply as they dismounted. Home. The word felt foreign on Aiyana's tongue. She had not had a home since the soldiers found her beside her family's bodies 3 years ago. The mission had been shelter, but never home. Daniel showed her to a small room off the main house, clean, simple, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the valley. After the dormitory barracks, it felt like a palace. "Supper's in an hour," he said. "You can rest until then, or explore if you like. You're safe here, Aiyana. No one will hurt you." As he left her alone, Aiyana sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window at the vast expanse of land. For the first time in 3 years, she was not surrounded by walls or bars or the constant watch of guards. The freedom felt strange, almost frightening. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, the emptiness inside her chest might someday be filled again. Outside, Daniel went about his evening chores, but his mind was on the girl. He had acted on impulse, driven by something he couldn't quite name. Sarah would have understood. She had always had a soft spot for strays and lost causes. As darkness fell over the ranch, Daniel found himself wondering what he had gotten himself into. The girl was damaged, possibly beyond repair. The town would likely shun him for taking her in, and he had no idea how to care for a traumatized Apache teenager. But when he looked toward her window and saw the soft glow of lamplight, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the sense that his house was no longer empty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, for the first time since Sarah's death, Daniel McAllister was not alone. The rooster's crow pierced the pre-dawn silence, but Aiyana was already awake. She had slept little, her body accustomed to the constant vigilance that 3 years of captivity had taught her. Through her window, she watched Daniel move about the yard, tending to his animals with the easy competence of a man who had found his place in the world. For a moment, she envied him that certainty. She had no idea where she belonged anymore, not with the Apache, who would see her as contaminated by white ways, and certainly not with the whites, who viewed her as a dangerous savage. She existed in a liminal space, belonging nowhere and to no one. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Aiyana? Breakfast is ready when you are." She dressed quickly in the simple clothes Daniel had provided, a practical riding skirt and blouse that fit better than anything she had worn at the mission. When she entered the kitchen, she found Daniel standing over a cast-iron stove, cooking eggs and bacon with surprising skill. "Hope you're hungry," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "I tend to make too much when I'm nervous." The admission surprised her. This man who had stood up to an entire town seemed nervous about cooking breakfast for one girl. "You are nervous?" she asked, her voice still rusty from years of speaking only when spoken to. Daniel smiled sheepishly. "Haven't had anyone to cook for in a long time. Sarah always said I was better with cattle than with people." "Sarah was your wife?" "Yes." His voice carried a weight of old grief. "She died our first winter here. Fever took her before I could get her to a doctor." Aiyana studied his face, seeing the pain he still carried. "I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Daniel set a plate before her, piled high with more food than she had seen in months. "What about you? Do you remember your family?" The question hit her like a physical blow. For a moment, she was back in that terrible dawn 3 years ago, watching her mother fall beneath the soldiers' bullets, hearing her father's war cry cut short by a cavalry saber. The smell of smoke and blood, the sound of her little brother's final breath. "I remember," she whispered, her hands shaking as she reached for her fork. Daniel saw her distress immediately. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked." "No," Aiyana said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "You have the right to know. My family, they died in a raid. Soldiers came to our camp at dawn. They said we had stolen cattle, killed white settlers. But we had not. We were peaceful people, trying to live quietly in the mountains. What happened to you?" "I was thrown from my horse when the shooting started. Hit my head on a rock. When I woke up, everyone was dead. The soldiers found me there and took me to the mission. They said I was lucky to be alive, that God had spared me for a reason." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And what did you think about that?" Aiyana was quiet for a long moment. "I thought God had a cruel sense of humor. Why spare me when everyone I loved was dead? Why leave me alone in a world that hated what I was?" "Maybe," Daniel said carefully, "you weren't spared to suffer. Maybe you were spared to heal. The missionaries said that too. They said if I prayed hard enough, accepted Jesus into my heart, I would find peace. But I prayed, Mr. McAllister. I prayed until my knees bled and my voice was gone. And still, I felt empty." Daniel leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "You know what I think? I think prayer isn't about getting what we want from God. It's about learning to listen to what He's trying to tell us." "And what is He trying to tell me?" "That's something you'll have to figure out for yourself. But I can tell you this, whatever it is, you don't have to figure it out alone." After breakfast, Daniel led her to the barn, where a gentle mare stood in one of the stalls. The horse was smaller than the cavalry mounts Aiyana remembered, with kind eyes and a calm disposition. "This is Estrella," Daniel said, stroking the mare's neck. "She's been lonely since Sarah passed. I think she might like some company." Aiyana approached the horse slowly, her hand extended. Estrella sniffed her fingers, then nuzzled her palm with surprising gentleness. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Aiyana felt a genuine smile tug at her lips. "She likes you," Daniel observed. "Want to try riding her?" For the next hour, Daniel patiently taught Aiyana to ride properly, not the desperate, Clinging style she had learned fleeing soldiers, but the confident, balanced seat of someone who belonged on horseback. She was a quick learner, her natural grace evident despite years of disuse. "You're a natural," Daniel said as they walked the horses back to the barn. "With a little practice, you'll be riding like you were born to it." "My father taught me when I was small," Aiyana said quietly. "He said a person without a horse was only half alive." "Smart man, we'll work on your riding every day if you want. And maybe you can help me with the cattle. I could use an extra pair of hands." The offer meant more to Aiyana than Daniel could know. It was the first time in 3 years that anyone had suggested she might be useful for something other than prayer and penance. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Daniel pulled out a well-worn Bible. Aiyana tensed, expecting another lecture about salvation and redemption. Instead, Daniel said, "Would you like to read with me? Not because you have to, but because maybe we can both learn something." Aiyana nodded slowly, curious despite herself. Daniel opened the book to a familiar passage, but instead of reading it aloud, he handed it to her. "Tell me what you think this means." Aiyana looked down at the page, at the words she had heard recited countless times at the mission. But for the first time, she read them not as a prisoner forced to listen, but as someone genuinely seeking understanding. "The Lord is my shepherd," she read slowly. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters." She paused, looking up at Daniel. "At the mission, they said this meant God would provide for us if we were obedient. But I was obedient, and I still felt empty. What if it means something different?" Daniel suggested. "What if it means that God doesn't just provide things, He provides peace? Look around you. Green pastures, still waters. Maybe God isn't just promising to feed your body. Maybe He's promising to feed your soul." Aiyana looked out over the ranch, at the peaceful pastures where cattle grazed quietly, at the gentle stream that wound through the valley. For the first time, she began to understand what the missionaries had been trying to teach her, not through fear and duty, but through the simple beauty of creation. "He restoreth my soul," she continued reading. "He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake." "Your soul needs restoring," Daniel said gently. "That's not something that happens overnight. It takes time and patience and the right kind of guidance." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Aiyana felt something shift inside her chest. Not the dramatic conversion the missionaries had demanded, but a quiet opening, like a flower beginning to bloom after a long winter. "Will you teach me?" she asked. "Not just to ride and work cattle, but to find peace?" Daniel smiled, and she saw in his eyes the same gentle patience. He showed his animals. "I'll teach you everything I know. But Aiyana, the most important lesson is this: you don't have to earn God's love. You don't have to prove you're worthy of peace. You just have to be willing to accept it." That night, for the first time in 3 years, Aiyana fell asleep without the weight of despair pressing down on her chest. And in her dreams, she heard not the echo of gunshots and war cries, but the gentle sound of water flowing over stones and the distant call of a shepherd leading his flock home. 3 months had passed since Aiyana's arrival at the ranch, and the transformation was remarkable. Her hollow eyes had regained some of their light. Her shoulders no longer carried the constant tension of someone expecting attack. She had learned to ride Estrella with confidence, to help with the cattle, and to find moments of genuine peace in the rhythm of ranch life. But peace, Aiyana had learned, was a fragile thing. The trouble started on a crisp October morning when Daniel rode into Silverton for supplies. Aiyana had begged to stay behind, still uncomfortable with the hostile stares and whispered comments that followed her through town. She was tending to the horses when she heard the thunder of hoofbeats approaching the ranch. 7 riders crested the hill, their faces hard with purpose. At their head rode Ben Foster, the banker who had opposed Daniel's decision to take her in. Behind him came other men she recognized from that first day, old Pete, the blacksmith Tom Wright, and several ranch hands from neighboring spreads. Aiyana's blood ran cold. She had seen that look before, in the eyes of the soldiers who had destroyed her family. These men had come for her. "Where's McAllister?" Foster demanded as they surrounded her. "In town," Aiyana replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "He will be back soon." "Good. That gives us time to settle this without bloodshed." Old Pete spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Should have done this months ago. Apache don't change their spots. What do you want?" Aiyana asked, though she already knew the answer. "You gone," Foster said bluntly. "Pack your things and ride out, today. This is my home." The words surprised her as much as them. She had not planned to say them, but they emerged from some deep well of truth she had not known existed. This ranch, this life she had built with Daniel's help, it was the first place she had felt safe since her family's death. Home? Tom Wright laughed harshly. "You think you belong here? You're a Apache girl. Your people killed my son last spring in a raid up north. You're lucky we're giving you a chance to leave peaceful-like." "I had nothing to do with any raids," Aiyana said, her voice growing stronger. "I have been here for 3 months, learning to live in peace." "Peace?" Foster's face twisted with contempt. "You want to know about peace? Yesterday, a cavalry patrol found tracks leading toward the Martindale Ranch. Apache tracks. 2 days later, their cattle were rustled and their foreman shot. Coincidence?" Aiyana's heart sank. She knew what they were suggesting, and she knew that no amount of protest would change their minds. In their eyes, she would always be Apache first, and Apache meant enemy. "I have not left this ranch except to go to town with Daniel," she said desperately. "Ask him. Ask anyone who has seen me." "McAllister's been bewitched by you," Pete declared. "Apache women know how to cloud a man's judgment. But we ain't fooled." Foster gestured to his men, and they began to dismount. "Boys, help the girl pack her things. She's got 10 minutes before we escort her to the territorial line." "No." The word came out stronger than Aiyana had intended. "I will not leave." For a moment, the men were too surprised to react. They had expected compliance, the broken submission she had shown when she first arrived. But 3 months of Daniel's patient teaching, of learning to pray not from fear but from hope, had given her something she had thought lost forever, the courage to stand her ground. "You will not leave?" Foster's voice was dangerously quiet. "Girl, you don't seem to understand your situation." "We're not asking. Neither am I." Aiyana moved toward the porch, where Daniel kept his rifle. "This is my home. Daniel gave me sanctuary here, and I will not abandon it." Tom Wright stepped forward, his hand moving to his gun. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Apache. We're trying to be civilized about this." "Civilized?" Aiyana's voice carried 3 years of suppressed pain and rage. "You want to drive me from my home because of crimes I did not commit, because of blood that flows in my veins that I did not choose. You call this civilized? Your people, my people, are dead." The words exploded from her with the force of a dam bursting. "My mother, my father, my little brother, all dead because soldiers decided we were guilty of crimes we had not committed. And now you want to do the same thing to me?" The raw pain in her voice gave the men pause. For a moment, they saw not an Apache enemy, but a young woman who had lost everything and was fighting for the one thing she had left. But fear overrode compassion. Foster nodded to his men, and they moved toward her. That was when the sound of approaching hoofbeats thundered across the valley. Daniel McAllister rode toward them like an avenging angel, his face dark with fury as he took in the scene 7. Armed men threatening the girl he had sworn to protect. "What the hell is going on here?" Daniel's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Foster turned to face him, trying to regain control of the situation. "Daniel, we came to reason with you. The girl has to go. There's been Apache trouble, and you decided to blame Aiyana? Daniel dismounted in one fluid motion, his rifle already in his hands. On what evidence? The evidence of her blood, Pete snarled. Apache is Apache, McAllister. You can't change that. Daniel's eyes found Aiyana, saw the fear and determination warring in her face. In that moment, he realized that somewhere in the past 3 months, she had stopped being just a responsibility and had become something far more precious: family. You're right, Daniel said quietly. Apache is Apache. And Aiyana is Apache. She's also the bravest, most loyal person I know. She's worked this ranch like it was her own, cared for the animals like they were her children, and shown more Christian charity than any of you self-righteous hypocrites. Daniel, be reasonable, Foster pleaded. Your neighbors are afraid. There's been talk of organizing a militia to deal with the Apache problem. If you don't send her away, you'll be seen as harboring an enemy. Then I guess I'm harboring an enemy. Daniel's voice was steel. But I know what I see when I look at Aiyana. I see a young woman who has lost everything and is trying to build a new life. I see someone who prays every morning for the souls of the men who killed her family, who tends wounded animals with the same care she would give her own kin. If that's your definition of an enemy, then maybe you need to examine your own souls. Tom Wright stepped forward aggressively. Pretty words, McAllister. But words won't stop arrows or bullets when her people come calling. Her people? Daniel's voice rose. Her people are dead. The only people she has now are the ones who choose to stand by her. And that's exactly what I'm doing. He moved to stand beside Aiyana, his presence solid and reassuring. This is her home now. She's under my protection. Any man who wants to take her from here will have to go through me. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. 7 men against 2, but Daniel McAllister had a reputation as a man who kept his word, and his rifle was steady in his hands. That it was Aiyana who broke the silence. Daniel, I will not let you die for me. If they want me gone, I will go. No, Daniel's voice was firm. Running never solved anything. You've learned to pray, you've learned to ride, and now you need to learn the hardest lesson of all. You need to learn to stay, to fight for what's yours. But I am not yours, Aiyana whispered. I am nothing to you. Daniel turned to look at her, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. You're wrong. You're not nothing to me. You're everything. The admission hung in the air like a challenge. For months, they had danced around their growing feelings, neither willing to acknowledge what was happening between them. But now, faced with the possibility of losing her, Daniel had finally spoken the truth. I love you, Aiyana, he said quietly. I love your strength, your courage, your gentle heart. I love the way you sing to the horses, the way you watch the sunset, like you're seeing it for the first time. I love that you've taught me to pray again, not from duty but from gratitude. Aiyana felt tears stream down her cheeks. Daniel ... Marry me, he said, his voice growing stronger. Be my wife. Make this place truly your home. The proposal hit the gathered men like a thunderbolt. An Apache wife for a white rancher? It was scandalous, unprecedented, dangerous. McAllister, you've lost your mind, Foster breathed. You can't marry her. The territorial government would never recognize it. The church would excommunicate you. Your neighbors would. My neighbors can go to hell, Daniel said flatly. I'll find a preacher who's more interested in God's love than man's prejudice. And if the territorial government won't recognize our marriage, then maybe it's time to find a territory that will. He turned back to Aiyana, his eyes soft with love and hope. What do you say? Will you stay? Will you be my wife? Aiyana looked at this man who had given her everything: safety, purpose, love, and had asked for nothing in return. She thought of the long journey that had brought her here, from the ashes of her family's death to this moment of choosing her own future. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, I will stay. I will marry you." Daniel swept her into his arms, spinning her around as joy burst through both their hearts. For a moment, the hostile men were forgotten, the threats meaningless. There was only love, and the promise of a future neither had dared to dream. Foster and his men exchanged uncertain glances. They had come to drive out an Apache girl, but they were faced with a woman who had just become engaged to one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. "This isn't over, McAllister," Foster said finally. "You think you can just ignore what she is? Ignore the danger she represents?" "I think," Daniel said, his arm around Aiyana's waist, "that the only danger here is the hatred in your hearts. Aiyana represents hope, the hope that people can change, that love can overcome prejudice, that two people from different worlds can build something beautiful together." As the men rode away, muttering threats and promises of trouble to come, Daniel and Aiyana stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Are you sure?" Aiyana asked quietly. "Taking me as your wife will bring you nothing but hardship. The town will never accept us." Daniel took her hands in his, looking into her eyes with all the love in his heart. "Aiyana, you've taught me that home isn't a place. It's the people who choose to stay with you, no matter what. You've learned to pray, to ride, and now you've learned to stay. But the most important thing you've learned is that you're worth fighting for." "And you've taught me," Aiyana replied, "that love isn't about deserving or earning. It's about choosing to see the best in someone, even when the whole world tells you to look away." As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, they stood together, two wounded souls who had found healing in each other's arms. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight against prejudice and fear. But tonight, they had love and hope, and the promise of a future built on the foundation of choosing to stay. In the distance, a coyote howled, and Aiyana smiled, remembering her father's words about the songs of the desert. Tonight, it sounded like a blessing. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of love conquering prejudice. Hit that notification bell to never miss our epic tales from the American frontier.